The keycard printer jammed again at exactly 2:47 a.m. That was the third time that winter, always. The same hour, always. That grinding click like it didn't want to spit the card out. Len was downstairs doing rounds and I was alone at the front desk. Snow tapped gently against the windows in that soft, constant way that made it easy to forget how cold it really was outside. And then I heard the lobby door open. No footsteps, no voice, just that soft chime. And then silence. When I looked up, a man was already standing at the counter, coat. Soaked, hood up, not moving. He didn't blink when I greeted him. He just placed a room key on the desk, one of ours, and whispered, "Not until 2:47. Let me know where you're listening from tonight, and if you've ever stayed somewhere that just didn't feel quite right. And if these stories help keep you company, consider subscribing so you won't miss the next one." My name's Dana Ellis. I was 37 when this happened, working nights at a small mountain lodge outside of Granby, Colorado. It was the kind of place that stayed busy in ski season, then got real quiet once the spring melt set in. Back then, I didn't mind the slow nights. It gave me time to think, time to breathe. My girls were grown, my divorce was final, and the only real thing tying me to that town was the job. I'd gotten used to the rhythm, the smell of pine cleaner in the lobby, the way the wind slipped around the corners of the building, the way Len Turner always shuffled when he walked. Len worked maintenance, grumbly old guy, 48 at the time, who claimed he liked the graveyard shift because people don't break stuff when they're asleep. He wasn't wrong. Most nights we only had 3 or 4 guests, occasionally a late arrival, a trucker, or someone stranded by the snow. The roads got real slick that time of year. We were halfway up a switchback, nestled in trees. If you missed the turnoff, you'd miss the place entirely, which is why it stood out when he showed up. It was a Thursday, late February. One of those nights where the snow hadn't stopped for hours, just kept coming in soft, endless waves. I'd made cocoa and was flipping through a local paper when the door opened without warning. Normally, you'd hear the gravel outside crunch or the wind shift when someone approached, but this man I didn't hear a thing until the door chimed. He was tall, lean, maybe 40s, wearing a thick brown parka, with the hood pulled up tight. Couldn't see much of his face, but his beard was frosted and his gloves looked soaked straight through. He didn't say a word. He just slid a room key across the counter. Room 207. I paused, confused. That room had been empty. I hadn't checked anyone in since 11. I asked if he had a reservation and he shook his head once slow. No eye contact. His voice, when it finally came, was low and raspy, like someone who hadn't used it in a long time. "I'll only need it until 2:47. I remember the way he said it, not like a request, more like a fact. I glanced at the time. It was 1:02 a.m. I should have pressed harder. Should have told him we couldn't assign a key without ID, without payment. But I didn't. There was something about the way he stood, the way the snow clung to him, like he'd come a long, long way just to get here. "All right," I said. "Room 207. He took the key, nodded once, and walked toward the stairs. No luggage. His boots left dark, melting footprints on the rug, thin, deliberate steps. He never looked back. About 20 minutes later, Len came in from the maintenance hallway. He was wiping his hands with a rag and muttering about one of the vending machines, shorting out again. I asked him if he'd seen the man in the hallway. What man, he said. I told him someone had checked in, gave him the room number. Len frowned. I didn't see anyone go upstairs. We both looked at the monitor behind the desk. The feed from the second-floor hallway camera was still rolling grainy black and white. Room 207's door was closed. I scrolled back through the footage. Nothing. No motion. No figure. Just a faint flicker like a frame skip around 1:03 a.m. I started to feel it then, that quiet wrongness. You know the feeling. Not panic exactly. More like something brushing past you that shouldn't be there. At 2:00 a.m., I brewed a new pot of coffee and walked the first-floor corridor. Routine stuff. I peeked into the lounge, checked the side exits, reset the printer in the office, but my mind kept circling back to 2:07. I radioed Len. "You mind checking up there? Just make sure the heat's working, and no leaks." He grumbled, but agreed. I watched the hallway monitor as he climbed the stairs, flashlight in hand. When he reached 2:07, he knocked. 3 soft raps. No answer. He tried again, then slowly turned the handle. The door opened without resistance. He stepped inside. I waited. 10 seconds. 15. I heard the radio crackle. "Dana." He said, "It's empty." I froze. "What do you mean, empty?" "There's no one in here," he replied. "Beds still made. Rooms cold." I blinked at the monitor. There'd been no exit, no door opening, no stairwell camera trigger. It didn't make sense. Len came back down, shaking his head. No prints on the carpet either, like nobody's walked in or out for hours. I didn't sleep the next day. I just kept thinking about that room key. I went to the logbook, the paper one we kept under the desk. I flipped back through each name, each room assignment. Nobody had been booked in 2:07 for over a week. I opened the drawer where the extra keys were stored. All there. Neat. Except for 2:07. And then I saw it. The key, the one the man had handed me, still sat by the printer tray, right where I'd left it, dry, clean. No snow melt, like it had never left the desk at all. I still don't know who he was, or how he got in, or why he said, "Not until 2:47, but every year around the same time that printer still jams. Always at 2:47 a.m., always that same grinding click. Len retired 2 years ago. He still calls me every winter, same question. You seen him again? I don't usually talk about that winter. Not because I'm afraid folks won't believe me, but because I still can't explain what I saw, or what I think I almost became a part of. Back in 2006, I worked the overnight shift at a gas station way up North Mile 237 off the Dalton Highway. It was mostly for oil rig workers, snowplow drivers, and the occasional long-haul trucker trying to make the stretch between Coldfoot and Dead Horse without stopping. The building was squat, concrete, ugly, and always half buried in snow from November through April. The heater rattled like an old man's lungs. The lights flickered constantly, and the pump canopy made this strange groaning sound whenever the wind shifted. It wasn't a job people kept for long, but at 22, with no degree and no real plan, I didn't mind the solitude. I'd bring a thermos, a book, and settle in behind the counter like I was the last man on earth. Most nights passed without incident. I'd restock candy bars, flip through the old log books when I got bored, and listen to the shortwave radio. Chatter the plow crews used, most of it coded, boring but familiar. The only regular customers were the state troopers who came by to thaw their fingers and refill on burnt coffee around 2 a.m. I never felt scared out there, just cold and quiet. That changed one Wednesday night in early February. It was around 1:45 a.m. I remember because the wall clock was ticking loud and slow. We were between storms, and that stillness always made the ticking feel sharper. I hadn't seen a single car in hours, and the roads hadn't been plowed since sunset. Then, out of nowhere, headlights swung into the lot. No crunch of tires over snow, just light. I stood up from my stool, peered through the glass. It was a late 80s Chevy pickup navy blue rust along the wheel well's mismatched rear bumper. Nothing fancy. Just sat there idling by pump 4 exhaust curling upward like it was breathing. I waited for someone to get out. No one did. After 2 minutes, I hit the intercom. "Need help out there?" I asked. My voice came out thinner than I expected. Nothing. Just the idle and that faint groan from the canopy. I put on my parka and gloves, stepped outside. The cold bit into my teeth. When I got close enough, I saw the cab was occupied, a man in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel. Head turned forward, still. Not sleeping. Just still. I tapped on the window. He didn't react. Something about him made my stomach twist. He was pale. Even in the dim light, I could see it like he'd been outside too long. His eyes didn't blink. His jaw was slack, but not open. Just waiting. I backed up. Not fast, just cautious. Went back inside. When I turned to look again, the truck was gone. No engine sound, no headlights, no tire marks, just the slow sway of the canopy lights overhead, like nothing had been there at all. The next day, I asked Gabe, my manager, about it. He shrugged and said maybe I'd drifted off. "Long nights do that to people," he said. "Maybe I dreamed it." But a week later, it happened again. Same truck, same pump, same time. 1:59 a.m. This time I watched from the register, didn't move. The headlights glowed against the snowdrifts, faint and blue. The figure inside didn't turn his head, didn't move, just sat hands on the wheel. At 2:01 a.m., the lights flickered once and the truck was gone. Again, no tire tracks. I went outside, walked the whole lot with a flashlight. Nothing. The snow was untouched. Not a dent, not a footprint. It was like the wind had erased him. I stopped sleeping during the day after that. Started reading the old logbooks left behind by attendants who'd worked here before me. We kept them in the back office, stacked under the outdated spill kits and expired snack inventory. February 12th, 1992. Blue Chevy truck came again. Wouldn't shut off. Left after 2. March 4th, 1997. Same guy, same time. Face looks wrong. Told him not to come back. He doesn't listen. December 3rd, 2003. He waited this time. Didn't drive away. Just sat. I locked the door. He left when the wind changed. All different handwriting. Different names. Same truck. Always pump 4. Always around 2 a.m. The entries stopped after 2004. No mention from anyone after that, just me. I started leaving the lights off at the pumps. I figured if he couldn't see them, maybe he'd pass by. But it didn't matter. He came anyway. Always just before 2. Then came the night it changed. February 22nd, 2006. I was tired. Hadn't slept properly in days. Coffee wasn't cutting it anymore. My hands shook from the caffeine, and every noise in the building felt louder: the hum of the freezer, the occasional snap from the heating duct. I thought about quitting, thought about calling Gabe and saying I was done. At 1:58 a.m., the wind died completely. At 1:59, the blue Chevy pulled in. I didn't move, just watched. At 2:00, the front door chimed. I hadn't heard it open. I hadn't seen anyone get out. But when I turned, he was standing inside the store, sopping wet. Not from snow, from something thicker. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. He just raised one hand slow and pointed toward the back room, then pointed at the floor and vanished. No flash, no sound, just gone. But where he'd pointed when I walked over there was a damp footprint. Bare. Human. Facing the wrong way. I called the state troopers the next morning. 2 of them came by around noon. I told them the truth, or as close as I could. One of them, older guy, didn't laugh. He said something strange happened out here in '92. A man named Walter Hicks, local miner, had driven off after a shift and never made it home. His last credit card charge, pump 4/151 a.m., February 11th. The receipt was still in the box. Same signature, same truck model. Nobody ever found him. Later that year, Gabe installed motion cameras. The truck never showed up on video. Just the canopy lights swaying and the snow moving sideways, like something heavy had passed through. I quit that job in March. Gabe still runs the place, but he won't work nights anymore. Last I heard, the new kid covering graveyards left after 1 week. Said a man came in once at 2 a.m., soaking wet, pointed toward the mop sink and disappeared. He said the floor smelled like gasoline afterward. Pump 4 still works, but nobody uses it. Not since the driver started coming inside. I grew up thinking I'd never go back there. Not because anything bad had happened before, but because of what happened the last time we did. In October of 2014, I took a trip with my father to the Copper River Basin. He'd hunted moose up there with his brothers back in the '80s, back when the rules were looser and the game was thicker. He used to tell stories about it: the crisp morning air, the smell of lichen after frost, and the silence that felt almost reverent. I think it had meant something to him, those early trips. And when I was a kid, I always pictured going with him someday. So when he called and said he'd drawn a late-season permit, I cleared my calendar and said yes, without even thinking. It would be just the 2 of us, one last trip before the snow closed in and the trailheads iced over. We left Glenallen around 6 a.m., towing a beat-up aluminum trailer with our gear and his old 4-wheeler hitched to the back. The road was slick but passable. Clouds hung low over the valley like smoke settling into the treetops. We passed a ranger checkpoint about 2 hours. The warden didn't say much, just reminded us not to stay past the 10th. Snow's coming early this year, he warned, tapping the edge of his clipboard like he didn't want to say more. My dad nodded, thanked him, and we kept driving. By late afternoon, we reached a ridge overlooking the river. He called it Camp 4 Not Official, just a spot he and his brothers used to pitch their tent. We set up camp near a dense patch of spruce. The fire pit was still there, mostly intact. We unpacked the rifles, checked the radios, and hiked a few hundred yards out before dark just to stretch our legs. We didn't see much: a couple of old tracks, scattered scat, and one distant call that sounded too far off to follow. That night, the temperature dropped hard. I remember waking up around 3 a.m. to the sound of something brushing against the tent. Not heavy, just a soft drag like a branch or a paw. I froze, listening. My dad stirred but didn't wake. After about a minute, it stopped. I told myself it was wind and went back to sleep. The next morning, we found something strange by the edge of the clearing, 3 snowshoe hares laid out side by side. Their necks had been broken cleanly, not bitten, not torn, just snapped and arranged in a row like a display. No tracks around them. The frost hadn't melted, which meant it happened early, probably before dawn. My dad squatted beside them and stared for a long time. Then he picked them up and carried them into the trees, saying nothing. We kept hunting. Day 2 was colder. Clouds rolled in from the west, thick and dark, and the light never got much brighter than a dull silver. We hiked out past a small ridge that sloped into a frozen marsh. It was quiet, unnaturally so. No bird song, no wind, just the sound of our boots crunching over the rim ice. We came across what we thought was a kill site. Blood spatter, some fur, and drag marks that stretched for maybe 30 feet before disappearing. The odd thing was the marks stopped in the middle of a clearing. No prints leading in. No carcass. Just a patch of disturbed ground and a silence that made your ears ring. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something about the air felt wrong, heavy, like it was pressing down on the tent from all sides. Around midnight, I heard the same dragging sound again, only this time it was followed by a soft knock. Just one. Then silence. I sat up, heart pounding. My dad was awake too. I could hear him breathing. "You heard that?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. We stayed quiet for a while. He didn't unzip the tent. Neither did I. The next morning we found fresh prints near the fire pit, but they weren't human. And they weren't animal either, not exactly. They looked like paw prints, but longer, almost stretched with 5 toes and a deep center claw. They circled the fire once, then vanished toward the ridge. Again, no melting, no smudge, just sharp impressions in the crusted snow. We didn't speak about it. We just packed quietly, made coffee, and hiked out early. But we didn't leave. My father insisted we give it one more night. Said he felt close to something, a bull, maybe something we'd spooked. I didn't argue. We stayed. The final night was the worst. The air was absolutely still. No wind, no sounds, not even the creak of tree limbs. We didn't start a fire. Something about the clearing felt exposed. Instead, we stayed inside the tent, listening. Around 2:30 a.m., we heard movement this time definite. Slow steps, crunching, lightly circling. Then a pause, then another knock. My father whispered, "Stay still." The sound moved around the tent in a half circle, then stopped. There was a breath, I swear it just outside the fabric. Wet, low, deliberate. Then another knock, lighter this time. More testing. Then silence. At dawn, we emerged slowly. There were no prints this time, but something had been left, a single antler, not from a moose, smaller, lighter. Set upright in the snow points down like it had been planted. That was the moment we decided not to speak about it again. We left camp an hour later. My father never filed the tag, said he'd try again next year. He never did. Now and then I look at the photos I took on that trip, the ridgeline, the mist over the trees, the angle of his face in the low sun. I don't have any pictures of the hares, or the tracks, or the antler, but I see them in my mind exactly as they were. I think we were being watched the entire time, not by something hunting us. Not exactly. It felt more like something studying us, waiting to see what we would do. I've gone back to the Copper Basin once since then, stayed in the lower ranges, never passed the tree line, and I never camp above the ridge. Because whatever left that antler, I don't think it wanted us gone. I think it wanted us to stay. I've been around wildlife most of my adult life, and I've seen some things that don't quite fit in textbooks. But this changed everything I believed about the field I worked in. In 2016, I was part of a research project tracking caribou migration along the Alaska-Yukon border. We were working under a federal grant through the University of Alaska Fairbanks, partnered with a few Canadian scientists. The idea was to better understand herd movements in response to climate shifts and rising predator activity. It was a tough assignment, cold, repetitive, and mostly quiet, but the data was solid, and the location remote enough to keep interference low. We operated out of a small prefab station about 20 miles off the grid. From the outside, it looked like a shipping container with antennas. Inside, it was tight quarters, always cold, and always humming with the low electric buzz of our tracking equipment. We had tagged 73 caribou that season. They wore GPS collars that pinged twice an hour, uploading real-time position data to our server. Most days were uneventful, just screens full of green dots slowly shifting northward like a lazy constellation. But then one morning in late October 43, of those dots stopped transmitting, all within the same 90-minute window. Just gone. We assumed it was a signal fault. The system was old, the satellites unreliable that far north, and power failures weren't uncommon. But when Jason, our tracker, drove out the next day to check the last known positions, he found nothing. No animals, no collars. Not even tracks in the snow, which had fallen lightly the night before, but wasn't thick enough to erase that kind of movement. It was like they'd never been there. I remember watching his face when he came back. He was a quiet guy, ex-military, not easily rattled, but he looked pale, unsettled in a way that made everyone else stop talking. He didn't say much, just handed me the SD card from the dash cam and told me to watch the last 10 minutes. What I saw didn't make sense. The footage showed the tundra gray and flat, and then something strange in the near distance, 7 figures moving in perfect unison across the snowfield. Not caribou, not wolves. Tall, too tall, and spaced evenly apart like chess pieces. They weren't running or walking fast, just gliding smooth and quiet. The image resolution wasn't good enough to make out features, but even from the blur, you could tell something was wrong. Their movement was off. Not mechanical, not human, just wrong. When I looked up from the monitor, Jason had already gone outside to smoke. That night, Mateo launched one of the thermal drones. It was windy and the feed was shaky, but what we saw stayed with me. In the area where the signals had died, there was a sudden cluster of heat blooms, again 7. Same spacing, same orientation, like someone or something was standing in formation, waiting. The heat was faint like body temp in a cold room, and then within 10 seconds it vanished, like they knew they were being watched. We didn't tell the university. We told ourselves it was anomalous data. A glitch. Maybe wildlife moving close together, maybe old heat pockets stirred up by the wind. But we didn't send anyone back out. Then one morning, Jason didn't come in for coffee. His bunk was made. His boots were gone. His rifle was still in the rack. The wind had picked up overnight, but the snowfall wasn't heavy. Still, there were no prints leading away from camp. We searched for hours, used the drone, called in help from the ranger station. When they arrived, the lead officer asked how long he'd been gone. "Probably since before dawn," I said. They found his boots 2 days later, 15 miles out, arranged side by side at the edge of a frozen river. Not tossed, placed, no blood, no torn clothing, no tracks between our station and the site. That night, Mateo pulled the last drone log and scrubbed the thermal scans frame by frame. In the corner of one of the images, barely visible in the edge bleed, was a single heat signature, standing beside the river. Upright, motionless. It wasn't Jason. And it wasn't Caribou. I didn't sleep that night. None of us did. 3 days later, one of the missing GPS collars pinged from a different location, 20 miles west of where the others had vanished. Dr. Kaminsky and I drove out with a rescue team. When we got there, we found it buried in a shallow depression, half frozen into the earth. Not dropped, buried. The surrounding snow was undisturbed. We stopped the project after that, shut down the field station, boxed the equipment, filed our report under equipment failure and weather conditions. No one asked questions. Maybe they knew better. Sometimes I wonder if the collars ever really malfunctioned, or if they were just taken. I've never been back to that region. I transferred departments the following year and took up forestry surveys closer to Anchorage. But I still think about Jason, and the figures, and the boots by the river. What bothers me most isn't that we lost track of the herd. It's that something out there knew we were watching, and it wanted us to stop. I don't usually talk about that summer at the lodge. Not because I'm scared of it, though maybe I should be, but because most people just nod politely and chalk it up to paranoia or bad luck. Maybe it was both. But I was there. I saw what I saw, and I still don't understand what really happened. In 2018, I was working as a seasonal employee at a small backcountry lodge in Wrangell, St. Elias. It wasn't a tourist resort, more of a rustic outpost for backpackers, climbers, and the occasional oddball looking to disappear off the map for a while. We had cabins that ran on propane and solar, a communal kitchen, and a bathhouse that always creaked louder than it should have in the wind. I handled check-ins, trail info, and making sure nobody burned the place down with their camp stoves. It was a quiet job, mostly, until Troy showed up. Troy Fletcher checked in just after noon on a Wednesday. He came with 2 other people, David and Amanda. They looked about the same age, maybe early 30s, and said they were old friends from college. David did most of the talking. Amanda smiled too much. Troy barely said a word. Something about him was off even then. Not dangerous exactly, just off. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, eyes sunken, and skin too pale for someone supposedly fresh off a hiking trip. They had a reservation for Cabin 3, which was one of the more isolated ones tucked into the spruce trees at the edge of the lake. I gave them the key, pointed out the bathhouse, and offered firewood. Amanda laughed and said, "Oh, we're here to detox from everything. No tech, no hot water, just us." David nodded like they'd rehearsed it. Troy looked past me toward the tree line. I didn't think much of it at first. We got a lot of strange duos and trios up there, people trying to mend relationships or break from them. But 2 nights later, one of the kitchen staff knocked on my door around 10:30 p.m. said a man was sitting alone outside the bathhouse, not moving, not talking, just sitting in the dark. It was Troy. I walked out to the gravel path and called his name. He didn't respond, didn't even flinch, just stared at the bathhouse door. When I got closer, he finally looked at me, just looked, and whispered, "They locked me in there." I didn't know what to say. The bathhouse didn't lock from the outside. He stood up slowly, wincing like something in his back hurt, and walked past me toward the trail without another word. I watched him disappear into the shadows between cabins. The next morning, Amanda came to the lodge porch, all smiles, asking for extra soap and bug spray. I asked if everything was okay. She said Troy had decided to take a solo hike and would be back that night. David waved from behind her, sipping coffee like it was just another camping day. Neither of them asked about what happened at the bathhouse. That night, Troy didn't return. The following morning, I went down to cabin 3 to check in on them. Amanda answered the door, hair damp like she'd just bathed, and said with a grin, "Still no sign of him. Guess he needed more alone time." I asked if they wanted us to notify the park rangers. David stepped into view, eyes narrowed, and said, "He's done this before. He'll show up." But I'd seen the fear on Troy's face. That wasn't a man going for a nature walk. I called the ranger station anyway. Protocol. They sent a couple of guys out in the afternoon, and we gave them Troy's registration info and a map of the surrounding trails. They set out before sundown and planned to do a wide loop near the ridgeline. When they came back the next evening, they'd found nothing. No gear, no footprints, no sign of a campsite. By the third day, Amanda and David were packing up. They didn't seem upset. No calls to family. No staying behind to help search. Amanda left a short note with the front desk that read, "If Troy shows up, tell him we headed west." That was it. No last name, no phone number, nothing. I reported the note to the rangers. They made a formal missing person report, and word spread through the seasonal staff pretty quickly. I couldn't shake the image of him sitting in the dark, saying he'd been locked inside. I decided to check the bathhouse myself. The inside looked normal at first. Wet floors, steam residue on the mirrors, a faint smell of cedar and sulfur from the hot water lines. But the third shower stall had something odd, deep scratches on the inside of the stall door just above the lock. Long ones, too erratic to be from gear, like someone had scraped at it with a knife or key, or fingers. I never reported that. A week later, someone spotted movement near the ridge at dusk, a shape in a blue parka limping. By the time anyone hiked up to check, there was nothing. No prints, no trail sign, just wind through the alpine pines. The following spring, after the snow thawed, a hiker found a torn piece of laminated ID down by the waterline. It was water-stained and cracked, but the name was legible. Troy Fletcher. The rangers filed it as a secondary trace, but nothing else ever turned up. No body, no backpack, no resolution. I only worked one more season after that. Sometimes I still think about Amanda's smile, the way she said, "just us," like it was a plan. And I wonder if Troy knew, even before they checked in, that he wasn't supposed to leave that cabin. He did, though, just not in any way we could explain. I grew up in the kind of place where everyone still waved at each other from their trucks, where the high school mascot stayed the same for 50 years, and where folks still brought peach cobbler to the sheriff's office on holidays. I never planned to work dispatch, But after my divorce, I needed the health insurance, and the hours suited me. I liked the quiet of the overnight shift, the stillness of it. At 3 a.m., most people are asleep and the radio hums like a low heartbeat. That's when you usually get the honest kind of calls, the scared ones, the lonely ones, and sometimes the ones you wish had stayed silent. This happened in the fall of 2019. I was a year and a half into the job, and it had become a rhythm. I'd pour my coffee into the same chipped mug, unlock the front lobby, and settle into the same creaky chair at the console. Most nights it was routine checking plates, flagging warrants, dispatching the occasional deputy to check on a barking dog or a late shift fender bender. There was comfort in the predictability. Until the night the phone rang at 2:41 a.m., not the 911 line, the landline. That already made me sit up straighter. I picked up, said the standard greeting, and a man's voice replied, "I need someone to come get me." His voice was low and tight, like he was speaking through gritted teeth. I asked for his name, and he said, "Daniel. I'm on Route 89, mile marker 212. I need someone to come get me now." I started typing into the log and asked if he was in an accident. He didn't answer at first. Then he said I wasn't supposed to get out. That's all. Just that. I asked again if he was hurt, and he finally said, "No. But I think something's still in the car." I paused. The line had that faint, static buzz you get sometimes on old analog towers. He told me he was in a brown Saturn pulled off near an old service road just past the marker. Said the dome light inside the car kept blinking on and off even though he'd pulled the fuse. I asked him if anyone else was with him, and after a long pause, he whispered, "I thought so, but I didn't see their face." That was enough for me to call it in. Rick Saunders was the closest deputy on duty. I radioed him, gave the details, and he said he'd be there in 20 minutes. I stayed on the line with Daniel. He wouldn't say much else, just kept asking me if I could hear it too. I told him I didn't hear anything, just him and the crickets on his end. He said it wasn't crickets, it was tapping. Saunders radioed in at 2:59. He was approaching the service road, said he saw the car. The next transmission was quieter. He said the driver's side door was wide open, dome light flickering, but no one was inside. No sign of struggle, just an engine still ticking with heat. He called out the name a few times. Nothing. I asked him if there was a phone inside. He said yes, an old flip phone still connected to our call sitting in the passenger seat. The call dropped as soon as he picked it up. We filed the report as an abandoned vehicle. The tow truck came around sunrise. They found the registration stuffed under the seat, Daniel M. Keating, Cedar City, 27 years old. No criminal record, no warrants, no outstanding mental health alerts. His parents said he'd left 2 days earlier to drive upstate for a camping trip. Never checked into the Trailhead Lodge, never came home. I remember watching Saunders on the lobby camera when he came in to file the report. He looked different, not scared exactly, just thinner somehow. He didn't say much, just typed out the incident and left early. I never saw him again after that shift. He put in for medical leave the next day and resigned before Christmas. They never found Daniel. That might have been the end of it, except for what happened 3 weeks later. I was back on shift, same coffee, same chair, when the landline rang again. Same time. 2:41 a.m. The voice said I still need someone to come get me. I froze. Same tone, same words, same static. I asked him to confirm his name, and he said, Daniel. I asked where he was. He said the car wouldn't unlock, that someone was sitting behind him but not speaking. I flagged the number. It came back as disconnected. I didn't dispatch anyone that time. Maybe I should have. But after everything we'd logged, there was no record of that number being active. Nothing even pinged off a tower. The call came again a week later. Same voice, same static. After the third time, I stopped answering the landline at night. I told myself it was just an old recording on a loop. Some weird mechanical hiccup rerouted through an abandoned relay. That's what the tech guy said when I asked about it, some glitch that sometimes echoes back into the system. Happens once in a blue moon. Only problem is it never happened before that night. And it hasn't happened since I left the job last spring. But sometimes when I'm driving that same stretch of Route 89, usually after midnight, I think about what he said. I wasn't supposed to get out. And I wonder if he ever really did. I once spent the night in a house that hadn't been lived in for nearly 20 years. It was late autumn in southern Indiana, and I was driving back roads on a freelance appraisal circuit, the kind of work that rarely gets you rich, but sometimes hands you stories you can't shake. That week I was cataloging estate items for a historical trust near Bloomington. A retired lawyer had passed away, and among his things was a handwritten note about a large trunk stored in a private home in Rock Bend, just a few towns over. There wasn't much more to it, just the address and a scribbled line. Ask for Eunice. Don't go upstairs. The house was a long, narrow structure tucked behind a cluster of overgrown maple trees. It looked almost gray beneath the cloudy sky, as if all the color had slowly leached out over the years. I pulled into the gravel lot around 4 in the afternoon, thinking I'd be in and out in an hour. I knocked 3 times before the door creaked open. The woman standing there looked as if she'd been born with the house and had aged alongside it, thin, rigid posture. White braid pinned with a comb, hands pale and veined like paper maps. "You're here for the trunk," she said, before I even introduced myself. I nodded and showed her my clipboard. She didn't ask for ID, just stepped aside and motioned me in. The inside of the house was even dimmer than I expected. Heavy velvet curtains drawn tight, the faint smell of cedar, and old wool thick in the air. No heat, just a small electric fan humming quietly in the corner. "The trunk's in the parlor," she said, and I followed her down a narrow hallway that seemed to lean slightly, like the house itself was tired. The trunk was beautiful mahogany, with brass handles early 1900s, covered in shipping stickers from France and Wales. I opened it slowly, half expecting to find it empty, but it was packed tight with letters, a lace shawl, and a small portrait of a woman in a wide-brimmed hat. When I looked closer, I realized the face in the painting looked almost exactly like the woman who'd let me in. "Is this you?" I asked. She didn't answer, just said, "That belonged to Margaret." I made my notes and took a few photos for the catalog. As I zipped my phone back into my coat pocket, she turned and asked, "Would you mind staying the night?" I hesitated. She noticed. "There's no hotel in Rock Bend anymore," she said, voice almost apologetic. "And the sheriff doesn't like visitors driving out past sundown. Deer all over the roads this time of year." I didn't argue. Something about the way she said it made me feel like she wasn't giving me a choice. She showed me to a small guest room near the back of the house, plain with a patchwork quilt and a small table lamp that flickered when I plugged it in. I didn't sleep right away. The quiet in that house wasn't the kind that soothed you. It was the kind that pressed against your ribs. Around 2:00 a.m., I heard movement, not footsteps, something more like dragging. A slow shuffle across the hallway. I sat up in bed and listened. Then I heard a door creak open and stay open. After a few minutes, I stepped out into the hallway. It was empty, but the door at the end, the one Eunice had told me not to bother with, was open about a foot. No light inside, just a dark, angled slice of the staircase beyond it. I stood there for a long time. I didn't go upstairs. The next morning, the door was shut again, and Eunice acted like nothing was unusual. I thanked her for the hospitality, told her the trunk would be listed under her name, and walked out to my car. There was frost on the windshield. As I scraped it, I glanced back at the house and saw the upstairs curtain shift. I left Rock Bend and turned in my report a few days later. The estate manager filed it away without much comment. But about a month after that, I got a call from the local sheriff. He asked if I was the one who visited the Tally property. I said yes. He sighed and asked if I had seen Eunice. I said, of course. I spoke with her. She let me in. He paused, then said, Sir, Mrs. Tally passed away back in 1997. We confirmed it. Sister found her at the foot of the stairs. I didn't reply, just sat there with the phone warm in my hand. He added, We went out to the property after you called. House was boarded up. Hasn't had power in years. Not sure who you saw, but it wasn't her. I hung up. I didn't need to know more. But sometimes when I pass through small towns like Rock Bend, I still glance at the second-floor windows, just in case Margaret's still waiting for someone to come upstairs. I think what unsettles me the most about all these stories isn't the strangeness itself. It's the fact that so many of these places, the roads, the houses, the faces, they look like nothing at all at first glance. You drive past them 1,000 times, nod at the people inside, and never imagine there's anything beneath the surface. But sometimes things hold on, not out of anger or even loneliness, just habit. Some moments don't let go. Some people don't leave even when they're supposed to. And some places remember every name, every voice, every knock on the door. They keep those things quietly like dust under the floorboards. I think we forget how many lives get folded into the walls of a place, and how every once in a while they press back. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. I hope these stories kept you company tonight. If you'd like to hear more like them, go ahead and follow the channel, or share this with someone who enjoys the quiet kind of unease. And tell me, have you ever been somewhere that seemed normal until something whispered that it wasn't good night?